Hey everyone, this is Isabel Fox, and in today's video, I'm going to talk about the legalities of sex work and escorting. I'll start by touching on the various legal models which exist globally, then I'll explain how a sex worker or escort might go about their business under these various models. Please note, I am not a lawyer, this is not legal advice, the information I'm about to share with you is based on currently available information I've obtained online, and is then followed by some observations based on personal experience and interactions with other people in the relevant industries. It is always important to do your own research. So I'll include some resources for you on how you might go about doing that throughout and below this video. Okay, let's get started. Are escorting and sex work the same thing? Technically, no. So it really depends on who you're talking to and the context in which they're using the word. Escorting can simply mean to accompany someone. Therefore, some escorts are in the business of selling their time and their companionship, not sex or sexual services. While sex work is typically going to mean the exchange of sexual services of some kind or in some way for payment. Escorting as companionship is likely to be the context utilized in countries where sex work is not legal. Two consenting adults alone in a room together may explore more than companionship, but this can't legally be for payment. Escorting as sex work is likely to be the context utilized and more explicitly stated in countries where sex work is legal. Now, the law you want to look at if you're considering entering the adult industry in your particular location are prostitution laws. Broadly speaking, there are 4 differing legal models for prostitution globally, and the following information is what I obtained from a quick conversation with ChatGPT on the 20th of July 2024. It explains them simply, and I'll walk you through them now. The first model is a fully criminalized model, which means that all aspects of prostitution are illegal. Some countries that have these models are areas in the United States, Russia, and Saudi Arabia. The second model is partially criminalized. Selling sex may be legal, but related activities like brothel keeping or soliciting are illegal. Purchasing sex may also not be legal in these places. Some example countries that have this model are the United Kingdom, France, Canada, and some parts of the United States. It's important to know that the specifics of this model change country to country. The third option is legalized. Prostitution is recognized as a legitimate business. Sex workers have rights and are subject to regulations. Some countries that have these models are Germany and Netherlands. And lastly, decriminalized, where all aspects of adult consensual sex work are decriminalized. So sex workers can operate independently without fear of criminal prosecution. New Zealand and some parts of Australia have this model. These models represent different approaches to regulating prostitution with varying degrees of legality for sex work and related activities. Each model has its own implications for the safety, rights, and well-being of sex workers, as well as broader societal attitudes toward prostitution. It is really important to know which model applies to any place you might be considering working and to understand the follow-on nuances which apply. For example, partial criminalization sometimes means that selling sex is legal, but paying for it is not. In places like these, the legal risk falls on the client, the one who is purchasing the service. This currently applies in Canada. Under this model, it is not surprising to me why I speak with so many Canadian escorts who have difficulty with getting their clients to comply with certain screening protocols, particularly providing photo ID. Legalized often means sex workers are required to register and comply with various rules and regulations. The upside of this is you can do sex work legally. The downside is you compromise anonymity, as the government has an official record attached to your legal name. And just because the activity is legalized doesn't mean it isn't stigmatized. Many legal sex workers face discrimination and stigmatization in other areas of life. Another factor of sex work, which sometimes applies under the partially criminalized and legalized models, is where the sex work takes place. For example, it might be illegal for a client to go to an escort's location unless the escort has obtained a permit for their premises. Often, getting a permit involves complying with various rules about the premises' exact location, registering with a government body, getting approval from landlords and neighbours, and more. The law on this topic is varying and at times convoluted. But you can literally go to the Google machine right now and find out which legal model and which various other rules apply to you. And I do recommend you do it because it has significant implications on whether you operate as an escort providing companionship or sex work. The next thing I recommend you do is seek to understand enforcement and regulation of these laws. Some countries, like Japan, have really complex laws relating to prostitution. I'm not going to go into the specifics of this complexity in this video. However, the adult industry tends to operate in a grey area in countries where laws are complex and is therefore determined by enforcement and regulation. Police activity is more apparent in some countries than others. I recommend you identify and contact your local sex worker organization to speak with more experienced and knowledgeable industry people about what's going on in your area. You're usually able to do this completely anonymously. Scarlet Alliance is the name of one of the national sex worker bodies in Australia. And the Sex Workers Outreach Project, SWAP USA, is one of the organizations in America. Just type into Google sex worker organization and the name of your country, and you'll find the relevant one for you. The law is constantly evolving and changing. Take, for example, the Sester-Foster laws brought into effect in the USA in 2018. These laws were aimed at combating online sex trafficking. However, they had a significant impact on the online sex work industry and were widely debated. Your local sex worker body will typically be the most up-to-date on the most recent laws, regulation, and enforcement in your local area. If you're working or thinking of working as an escort, companion only, or otherwise, I highly recommend you contact them. You want to make informed decisions for yourself so you can determine what type of business you're comfortable operating. Now, a word of advice on this. Be prepared for a lot of seemingly conflicting information and behavior, because not all laws are actually enforced. For example, did you know it is illegal to jaywalk, to cross the road anywhere other than a designated crosswalk in some states in Australia? Wild, right? Yet people do it every day, because it is not a law which is legally enforced most of the time. Some countries have laws which are completely contrary to what we see occurring before our eyes out in the open every day, even in the adult industry. So, don't just rely on what you see going on around you or on how you see other escorts behaving. Also know the police can change their enforcement of laws at any given time based on what's happening politically or otherwise. What might be ignored today by them could become a focal point of theirs tomorrow. In one state in Australia a few years ago, where sex work is not decriminalised, it became known within the industry that there'd been a change in the head of police in that particular state. A female, ironically, had come into authority and decided policing sex work was a high priority and a good way to spend police people's time. Many sex workers unfortunately faced prosecution. Regardless of whether you agree with the law or not, it's important to understand it and to make informed decisions about how you decide to operate within it. Okay, now that we broadly know how the law works, let's talk about some practical implications one should consider when operating under these models. The first is client screening. Now, screening clients is important for many reasons. First and foremost, often escorting means being alone or in a room with a stranger you've not met before. And sex or no sex, this has obvious safety implications. So screening for safety is important. I have another video on my channel specific to screening, which I've linked below. Screening to some degree or another should be important to all escorts. However, it might be especially important to an escort who is working anywhere laws are less sex worker friendly. Even if you're only providing a companionship service, you probably don't want to be in a situation where you're being scrutinized as potentially offering sexual services. Many escorts with this concern obtain personal identification from clients, which shows that they're a normal, non-law enforcement human being with a regular job and a normal social media footprint. A reference from one or more other escorts who can confirm the client's authenticity is helpful too. Now, if you're in a place like Canada, where as of today it's legal to provide sex work but it's not legal to purchase it, then you probably want to put yourself in your client's shoes if you want to maximize your income. Not all clients will understand the nuances which apply to them, but some will, and therefore some people will be more sensitive to screening. If you find you're getting a lot of pushback from otherwise willing to pay clients to your screening process, then think about how you can get comfortable in all the ways you need to be comfortable without putting the client at risk. For example, you might do a video call with the client and get him to show you his ID on camera so you can see it, but they don't have to actually send it to you. Most countries also have specific client reporting databases which escorts utilize. To find out what these are, just contact 20 or more escorts in your area with proof that you're also an escort, so you can send a profile link which shows the number you're contacting from. Let them know you're new to the industry and ask them how they screen clients and which reporting databases they use to do so. You can also often find this information on Reddit. Some escort advertising websites have inbuilt databases, or there are specific apps and websites set up for screening purposes. Now, when I am driving on the road, doing nothing wrong, and being totally legally compliant, and I see police up ahead, if an alternative route is available which avoids them, then I'm probably going to take it. In fact, there's even an app you can use while driving called Waze, where other drivers kindly report the presence of police to their non-law enforcement peers, and I think that that's quite considerate. Although the police are providing a valuable service to the community, which we absolutely couldn't do without, they also have the power to be unpleasant, even when people are completely law-abiding. So why take the risk of coming across a police person who's having a bad day if there are ways to avoid it? So I love using the app Waze, which tells me some information about a route I haven't taken before so I can avoid it if I so choose. I highly recommend to other drivers or anybody who wants to ensure that they're going to have a pleasant driving experience or other sort of experience to use any application they can to make sure that their way forward is trouble-free. The next thing you want to think about is how and what you advertise. Remember, if you're in a place where sex work is not legal, having an advertisement which speaks about specific sexual services might get you into trouble. After all, most things on the internet leave a footprint and can be traced to a source eventually, particularly by bodies with extraordinary power. Escorts who are exchanging their companionship for a fee usually simply describe what they're like as a person. For example, they might be really feminine, bubbly, cute, and like the classic girl next door. And if I were a client reading a description of someone like this, it would tell me about the type of companion I'm likely to be meeting with. Similarly, someone might describe themselves as daring, kinky, flexible, and wild. That would paint quite a different picture for a potential client, wouldn't it? Another approach I've seen companionship escorts take is advertising that they accept a personal donation for their time as opposed to explicit fees. But like all things grey, it would likely depend on the relevant body's interpretation of this description. And in a serious situation where the law was being consulted, there would likely be some kind of definition about what does and does not constitute a donation. That is probably worth looking into and speaking to your local sex worker organisation about. You might have also heard of apps like Signal, which are supposedly completely private and encrypted anonymous communication platforms. Maybe if you had something super private to discuss, you would check out an app like this. When in doubt though, if you don't want to be suspected of doing something you're not doing, it's probably safest not to ever in any way write or say anything anywhere or to anyone which could be construed incorrectly. If you're a companion and exchanging the pleasure of your time and company for a fee, that's all you need to talk about or accept money for. For example, when I pay a business consultant, sometimes we have lunch together while they're giving me business advice. And it's nice that we both want to have lunch together as two adults who enjoy eating food, but what I am paying for is their business advice. And so that's all we talk about. Number 3 is personal anonymity. Regardless of the legal model, escorting, sex or no sex, invokes societal stigma in most places. If you would prefer to avoid this stigma, then keeping your work private amongst people who you don't know or trust is probably a good idea. Most things can be traced some way somehow, but some things are harder to trace than others. Wherever possible, consider your personal anonymity. Many escorts use Proton email addresses, or accept cash or Bitcoin only, just to create a little distance between themselves and the judgment of those in society who don't share their views about their profession. Now, no approach is foolproof, but depending on your sensitivity and personal situation, you should look into and implement whatever you feel will keep you most safe. And lastly, accept risk. Escorting, sex or no sex, typically comes with risk. It is one of the reasons why the price point is so high. In places in Australia where sex work is decriminalised, the job is still not risk free. And not everyone is comfortable taking that risk, which is totally okay. If you're not comfortable living with the risk the job poses, whatever that might be, then it might not be for you. As an independent escort in Australia working in Sydney where sex work is decriminalised, being alone with a man who expects sexual intercourse you haven't met before is a risk. If you're working as a companionship only escort in America, for example, meeting a client who's passed all your screening, it doesn't guarantee that you really know who he is. There is always risk. I am very fortunate to say that in my 6 years working as an escort seeing clients, I never had any high risk situation occur. And many escorts I know and speak with can say the same based on their particular situation. But just because it hasn't happened to me or to your friend or to anyone else doesn't mean it can't happen to you. Every time I chose to put myself in a room alone with a man I didn't know or any client I didn't know, I was walking into the potential of an unsafe situation, and only I can make that decision for myself. So if you are an escort, or if you're thinking of giving it a go, my suggestion to you is that you do it with your eyes wide open, armed with knowledge and with tools and procedures in place designed to protect you to the best of your ability. Speak to other industry people. Contact the relevant organisation in your area. Jump on Google and find out which legal model applies to you. Because in the eyes of the law, ignorance is typically not a defence. That's all for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now. If you want to learn more escorting tips, just click the link below this video.